Hi, I'm Penta, and today I'm here to talk to you about market research. I'm currently the director at Fine Feathered Fiends, but I am also a data analyst. I'll actually be finishing a master's in business analytics soon, which is very cool and exciting, but has been very exhausting. And last year I was here and gave a talk on art direction. Sometimes it surprises people that the art person is also a numbers person, but hey, here we are. So I'll be talking about market research. Let's start with the broad definition. This is learning about a target market and its customers. It's about learning from other people. Now, I'm going to focus on pre-production, but you can and should do these kinds of things during production or before any crowdfunding campaigns, because what you learn from your research can refine your current efforts and improve future ones. I also am going to assume that you're putting your game on Steam for this talk. A lot of the ideas will apply elsewhere, but most of the specific tools that I reference are for Steam data. And I'm also going to focus on free tools, things that anyone can use. And I wanted to include more about how to learn about the audience side and where they are, because those are really important parts of market research, but it is a very large topic and I didn't have much space. Still, I recommend learning more about that if you haven't. What can market research do for you? Well, it can guide development decisions. If you have multiple ideas, this can help you decide which is likely to do better, or it can just help you think of new ideas, and it can set realistic expectations. This helps you define your budget and scope for your ideas. It can also build a case for your game's potential to investors. If you want to convince someone to give you money, you need to convince them that they might get it back. An idea of how other games in your niche are doing and where you stand in relation to them helps with pitches and crowdfunding. Now, even if you aren't making commercial games, market research can still be useful. You don't need to measure success in terms of money earned. And, if you just want more people to play your games and know about your work, marketing in general is good. Now, the type of game that you decide to make is your first and one of your biggest marketing decisions. And there are two common ways to plan. Most people start with the idea. If you want it to go anywhere, you need to think about scope and budget early on, like how long will it take and how much will it cost? These are difficult skills to develop, but really important. And even though development rarely goes according to plan, but you still need to plan. But another way you can think about it is to start from your resources. This is better if you want to sell or even just finish games. And game jams really encourage this mindset. They're great for your planning skills. I recommend people check them out. Both of these are valid approaches. A resource-oriented mindset is better if you want to make this a career. And thinking about the business side doesn't mean you have to sacrifice artistic integrity or anything like that. In fact, both approaches should result in a game that you want to make. If you do all this research and you find out what's trending and you kind of force yourself to do something you're not really interested in, it tends to show in the final product, and it just sucks. The goal is to understand where your idea is in an ecosystem of games and who wants to play it. So keep an open mind. You don't need to chase trends, but they can inspire you or just make your current ideas better. And if you really have the one artistic vision that you don't want to change for anyone, you should still check out what other people are doing and what's popular. Like I mentioned, it can just help set your expectations for performance. Now, a brief note about mindset when comparing to others. I like the term peer analysis to emphasize that you shouldn't see your fellow developers as people you need to win against, because other game success won't hurt you. VNs are finite. Even if there's branching or some other design that increases replayability, it's not like, say, an open world game, which is also finite, but can really eat up hundreds of hours, and someone might play different parts of it over and over. Rather than do that for visual novels, most people will seek new stories and new visual novels. So don't worry about competition. Remember how many people love two cakes. Now, a really useful tool for market research is something called comp titles. They're actually known as competitive titles, target games. There are many things you can call these. I just say comp titles from a previous job. These are games like your game that you can learn from. When you're defining them, it's often good to narrow by genre first. So think about what inspired you, what's selling, or what didn't sell. Don't shy away from failure. That can be really helpful to learn from. And what's made by a similar sized team. Again, that can just set expectations for how things might go for you, or what's maybe too ambitious, or what you could do. And identify at least 3 of them. Not too many. It's easy to get lost in the weeds doing this, and it can become a form of procrastination, but you want a range. So you could get one game that answers each of those questions on the left. And when you're finding these, don't limit yourself to what you see on social media or what you're personally interested in, because that is a tiny, tiny pinpoint in terms of what's out there. So how do you actually find comp titles? Where do you look? And it's good to look for similar games on the platform you're targeting, Steam in most cases. Steam has a more like this widget on store pages, but it's very hit or miss. According to Steam, this game is like Doki Doki Literature Club, Hush Hush, Only Your Love Can Save Them, and Berserk. I'd quiz you all on what this is, but we've got a time limit, so if you guess Nekopara, you're correct. If you click into the widget to open a new page, you get slightly better results in most cases, but I'd argue that none of these are a good match for Nekopara if you actually look into these games and start comparing them. Now, there are other ways to find comp titles. Steam prioritizes what's selling over nuance. Valve wants to make as much money as they can, and again, sometimes the more like this can actually be very helpful. Social media and personal interests, you get that nuance, but there's a lot out there that could be doing great on Steam without much of a social media presence. And the site I was going to recommend for finding similar games, Game Data Crunch, is no longer functional as of last month. I found that out when I was making these slides. So instead, take a look at Steam Peak. Their tagline is indie-friendly discovery, which might help you find people working at your scale that you weren't aware of. I haven't used it enough to really endorse it, and the site has some oddities, but hey, I thought it was worth mentioning. Now, once you have some games, how do you evaluate performance? What do you look for? How do you find that information? Well, obvious place to start is you can look for postmortems of people talking about their games, and you can also just look for a lot of public information. It is out there, and it's out there for visual novels specifically. For example, Gabby from 2.5 Studios, IL from Synstoria, and Tony from Black Tabby Games are all people working in visual novels who shared a lot of helpful specifics about their games or crowdfunding campaigns. Now, while there are things out there, it can be hard to find if you don't already know about them, the places, the spaces, accidental rhyme. However, at the indie scale, you can just talk to people. Networking is good, and we can learn from each other. Vimi's talk this year was great. If you missed it earlier, definitely check it out on YouTube. It's okay to ask questions about how they're doing things or how things are going for them. You can even passively absorb things just by being in certain development spaces. People might share things in, say, Dev Talk's Discord marketing channel that they wouldn't put on Twitter. And this point is one of the reasons why I discourage a competitive mindset. It can make this kind of thing harder. Now, that guy over there is Chris Zukowski, and his whole thing is helping people market their games on Steam. He owns a Discord server that has a whole channel dedicated to people just sharing their numbers, and people are quite open about sharing what's going on with them in terms of, the business side of game dev. This isn't specific to visual novels, but in general, I recommend checking him out. I owe a lot of what I've learned to him. Now, another thing that's really good to look at is just data for both genres as a whole and specific games. But there's some things to really think about. Unless you directly ask or someone tells you, you aren't going to know sales numbers. You can estimate, but be cautious. It's better to think of this as giving a sense of scale rather than exact numbers. And if you're thinking about sales as revenue, remember that you don't know how much something costs to make. So don't mistake any of those numbers for something like profit. You can look at public numbers like reviews and Steam follower counts and the relationship between these different numbers. You can use these to estimate sales or wish lists, but remember that it won't be a one-to-one match. This is a complicated topic. My 2 cents is that indies should move away from something called the box leader method, if you've heard of that. This is when you multiply a game's review count on Steam by a certain number to estimate sales. There are other resources. And you can also just use data about the games themselves, like common prices or length when designing your game. There's no need to hyper-focus on sales as like the only form of data. In general, take any estimates with a grain of salt, because despite all these disclaimers, you can still learn a lot using public data and estimates. It's not perfect information, but hey, it's better than nothing. Now, one resource is BG Insights. This is a powerful source of data and charts and all sorts of goodies that I want to mention, but like I said, I'm going to focus on free tools here. So I recommend Gamealytic, which is free as of this talk and provides similar information. A few more caveats for the road that apply to any tool for estimating stats is that games without many players or sales, they'll have less accurate information just due to smaller sample sizes. This is how statistics work. Free-to-play games often have less accurate estimation. It's very hard to estimate revenue from that, as well as bundles on Steam. And Gamealytic can't account for external sales like keys that are handed out as part of the Kickstarter campaign. Now let's look at the visual novel tags specifically. These stats are from Gamealytic as of January 2016, 2024 for released games only. Around 8% of visual novels released, or about 8% of games on Steam have this tag, and on average, they earn around $2,000 and are priced at $9. All of this is in USD. They have an average playtime of 5 hours. Now, as a side note, going purely by the visual novel tag does get you some noise. Not everything that uses this tag is what most people would consider a visual novel, but I've done some modeling of my own, and when we're talking thousands of games, splitting hairs to define what really counts as a visual novel, it's always been a fool's errand in my experience. And Steam itself is quite liberal with the definition. I wouldn't be surprised if Undertale is in there. Now, here's a chart from Gamealytic. This is a pie slice of just game sales, not revenue, but like the sales in terms of numbers or units sold. I picked 10,000 to highlight as a somewhat arbitrary number because it fits into their visual ranges. One of the things I do dislike about the site is the pie slices or the ranges for certain types of charts can be really unhelpfully wide. Like revenue charts, one of the buckets is between $50,000 and I think it was like 200,000. Not super great, but anyways, you can look at this as 79% of games sell less than 10,000 copies, or 21% sell more than that. For many people, 10,000 is quite the ambitious number, so what kind of money is that? It sounds amazing when it means 100,000. Like you look at, say, things priced around the average $9.99 USD. If that happened to something I worked on, I would consider it astounding success, but there's a lot to consider. Like Steam's 30% cut brings that down to about 69,000, and this can't account for like discounted sales, taxes, and again, those production costs. Now, how many visual novels earn at least 100,000? A cool thing about Gamealytic is that you can go from charts to just a list of games that match your filters, and you can click each game in that list to get even more detailed information. So here's some stats about that 100,000 plus group. In general, most are Japanese games from established publishers, and many of the biggest ones stretch what you might call a visual novel. That noise I mentioned earlier becomes louder here, and that's when you want to start paying attention to it and filtering it out. The average price is over twice the general average. There's the obvious point that a higher price means you need to sell fewer copies. Now, one recommendation that's just not unique to visual novels. If you want to make money from this, you should prioritize smaller games that are faster to develop. I'm far from the first person to say this, and I think it's possible to do that kind of thing without racing to the bottom in terms of quality. You'll get way more useful information if you're more specific in your search, but I went through this general process to show how you can apply this to your situation, your niche. You can look at your comp title specifically on Gamealytic or sites like it. And here's an example about the kind of tag-based approach. There are roughly half as many Otome games, or 6% of visual novels on Steam compared to 12%, but they have twice the median revenue at 7,000 versus 3,000. I'm not saying that Otome is a better choice than horror. I'm actually working on a horror game after all. But something I've heard, and here I'll cite Mr. Chris Zukowski again, is that horror is a hot genre for indies. this may not be as true for visual novels, and doing this kind of like tag analysis and tag research can help you identify things like that. Another site that you can get a lot of information from is SteamDB. This gives an almost dizzying amount of info from multiple sources, and I'm only going to cover two things. This game is Cooking Companions for anyone curious. You can see a comparison of owner estimates across different platforms. In the past, you may have heard about Steam Spy, but I don't recommend it these days, especially for novels. They tend to be working at the kind of scale that Steam Spy really struggles to accurately estimate. You can also see follower charts on SteamDB, and this can tell you how quickly a game's audience on Steam grew, as well as the dates on big changes, which can give you clues about marketing or events and just ranges you can investigate. Say when something took part in a Steam festival or a big streamer played it. For this game, the green rel is its release date, so it's not a surprise to see a jump there. Followers are also related to wish lists, and I've seen people use them as a way to estimate wish lists, which is useful for unreleased games. But remember, one follower doesn't mean one wish list. It's worth mentioning, but kind of its own topic. Now, some other things you can look out for when you're studying specific games. This can show you what their marketing is like. Obvious thing is look for social media and press coverage, festival and event participation. Crowdfunding is a big one to know about, and prologues on Steam are separate game pages. They're basically a demo with its own Steam page. This is a trend that's increasing over the past few years, and I have seen these for a few visual novels. Sucker for Love and Cooking Companions are two examples. They both have prologues that seem to have really helped their main game get a lot of visibility. Localization is also something else that's really good to know about because this increases a game's reach. So check for that when you're looking at any specific game numbers. Looking for streamers, who streamed it. This is also really good. And a tool you can use for that is Sullynome. There's a Date with Death. That's really been popping off lately. Good job, Gabby. Sullynome, helpful site for finding streamers, and you can see who's played your game or find people to reach out to by searching for similar games. Another cool thing that I couldn't really fit nicely, but talking about your game on Reddit, this can be hard due to most Reddit self-promotion rules, but you can get good results since those are forums of people organized around really specific topics. Andre Kashka has made a visualization tool that shows graphs of related subreddits. I just think you should know about it. Here's an example where I search for the Atoma Games subreddit, and you can click to highlight specific clusters, and you can also just see the most recent posts in selected subreddits. Now, when you're doing all this, it's easy to become overwhelmed, but remember that this is an ongoing process. You don't need to do all of these things at once. You're going to do this during pre-production, during production, beyond production. You really want to define what you care about. There's no need to try and grasp it all. And it's worth learning some basic organization skills. This helps with all sorts of things that aren't market research too. Now, limit how much time you spend looking at numbers. If you're like me, it's really easy to get sucked in. And if you go a little overboard, this can kind of be a way that you procrastinate. So don't be seduced by numbers. I know for some of you, there is no risk of that. Worth mentioning. Now, market research, really big topic, and getting comfortable with charts and learning how to read them. These are skills you might not have, but you can learn at least the basics of them. So even if you're not a data person, you can define your game's identity, look at other games, search websites, and think. These are essentially all things we've covered in this talk today. Like you could go start getting some comp titles, well, after VNConf. You don't want to stay around for the rest of the other talks. But we are at the end of mine. That's what I have to say about that. So thank you for listening. And a few shout outs to some other folks. If you're a part of the talk, you've probably heard of Aramia's marketing resources that are tailored to visual novels. I mentioned him earlier, but again, Chris Zukowski's work has been a huge help. Rami Ismail's blog/newsletter, Leveling the Playing Field, is fantastic if you want to learn more about the business side of development. And Simon Carles has been doing game research for at least a decade, so I recommend the Game Discover Co newsletter that he runs. I hope you have a better idea of how market research can help.
All right. Thank you. And I'm
Mhm.
just happy that there's more data people in in the biz. Okay, there's some questions. I'll start reading some of them out. All right, here's one. So, is there any suggestions for gathering useful, meaningful data for not safe for work games without that don't have giant data sets available?
So one of the reasons why I really like Gamealytic compared to even some other free tools that I checked out is they include the not safe for work stuff in their results. Some collection sites kind of politely filter out the sexual content. So depending on the tool you use, you might not need to worry about the not safe for work aspect.
All right. And so another person's asking, do you think that market research has a place for true passion projects, like not made for profit, probably distributed for free? And does it differ from its role in a for-profit kind of development?
Yeah, I do think that you're gonna get different things out of it. I mentioned it in the talk, but really it can just kind of give you an idea of how things might do. Or you can really think of it as a way to like find inspiration, just finding games that are like yours, maybe it'll give you some new ideas.
Cool. All right. So someone asking, relative to your release date, when should you start cold calling streamers? Do they want advance notice, or is it hard to get their attention and you want something in hand? What does that look like?
It's hard to get their attention, especially for visual novels. I've struggled to apply some of kind of the general advice for streamers to visual novels. So I, at minimum, would make sure that you have a polished demo. Um, People have talked about things like having embargoes and saying about to streamers first. That is only useful, I think, if you already have a really big audience. But in general, I would start collecting information about streamers like months ahead of time. What I'll do is I'll just kind of set aside a little bit of time here and there to like check out some Twitch streams and like write. I have a list of streamers that I can eventually reach out to. But you really want to have a polished demo first.
All right. Any other questions here? Otherwise, we can go into a